Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix.
My name is Robert. I'm a recovered alcoholic. Robert. My sobriety date is April 25th, 1986. And it's been a great ride. So for those who are new or relatively new to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. We all thought we could find an easier sort of way, but we can't. It just doesn't exist. Not for people like you and me who are real alcoholics. And I am a real alcoholic. F. Scott Fitzgerald said, first a man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man. And I would like to take credit for my sobriety, but I can't. God could and would if he were saw it. And I'm a big AA thumper, and I make no apologies for anything I will say tonight, because most everything I'll say tonight comes from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to talk about AA, just like I talk about my bariatric surgeon who gave me life-changing surgery. I'm no longer morbidly obese. My dermatologist who cut out my melanoma cancer, and my orthopedic surgeon who gave me 2 knees. Anyone who has a direct result of saving my life, I like to talk about them. Because when I got sober, I didn't know I was alcoholic. I just knew that I couldn't drink, and every relationship I ever had, every job I ever had, every facet in my life was gone, and I was left with dying. I remember standing in front of the mirror, and many of you do remember it. We all like to think we get here because we're good people. None of us are. I haven't met anyone who got here on a sunny Saturday afternoon because they were a good person. We usually get here ravaged. We usually get here because if we go any further and don't end up in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're going to die. And I remember February 9th of 1986, standing in front of the mirror. And you know how you'll hear voices, and the voices I had heard were all the people I had disappointed along the way. And they were saying, Bobby, 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 what are you doing? Because by this time, everyone was baffled that in spite of losing everything I had had, wives by this time, children, jobs, you name it, we lost it. And I stood in front of the mirror, and none of the voices were there anymore. And I knew in that moment of clarity, I was going to die if something didn't change. I was convinced that I was going to die. I was convinced that that chair would hold me up when I sat down on it. And I went into treatment that morning. Unfortunately, there's a part in the big book that says there are those too who suffer from grave emotional mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. And I didn't. I had the capacity to be like you. I wanted to learn what you said because I wanted to be included. Because, it's so funny when we clap for the newcomer. Where else are you going to go where you burn your life to the ground and they clap? It still amazes me after all these years. And I still adhere to the program of alcohol. I still have a sponsor. My sponsor I talked to this morning. You can call him and ask him. He might not be favorable about the conversation, but it's hit or miss with him and me. I've known him since I've been sober. I've known him for 40 years, and he celebrated 46 years of sobriety on January 1st of this year. And I just got off the phone when I was in the parking lot with a friend of mine named Scotty. And Scott, his anniversary is January 28th, 1984. And so I know AA works. Oftentimes we'll hear people say AA doesn't work. Well, you probably didn't work it. You thought you could find an easier, softer way, and we all want that. None of us want to do the work that it takes to get to where we are at in sobriety. And there's some people in this room who have some long-term sobriety. And if you don't have a sponsor and you leave tonight without a sponsor, that's on you. Because that's foolishness. I would never go a day with sobriety without a sponsor any more than I would without my driver's license driving down the road. I just wouldn't do it. It's just not healthy for a person like me who thinks they're always right. And then some of the time I am, but the times that I think I am, I still need to have my ego checked. And one of the things in the big book that it talks about, it says, because you'll hear a lot of serious things from the podium. We've been speaking to you sometimes of serious, sometimes tragic things. We've been dealing with alcohol in its worst aspects, so we aren't a glum lot. If newcomers could see no joy or fun in our existence, they wouldn't want it. So one of the things that we try to portray is an attitude of gratitude, and you've heard it before. We're excited about the life that we've been given because we know what the alternative is. We know that if we go back out, we may never come back. And that's not why we stay sober, but that's not a bad thing to remember. Because alcohol, it says in the big book, it says it's cunning, baffling, and powerful, and it is. And if this doesn't scare you, and I'll back up a bit after I say this, alcoholism progresses whether I'm drinking or not. And if you've ever seen anyone with time relapse, you're in for a rude awakening. Because my first 12-step call was in Las Vegas. I got sober in Las Vegas in 1986. And my first 12-step call was a person who had been sober 20 years. When you're a newcomer, 20 years is a long time regardless. But when you're a newcomer, it's a lifetime. And I remember going to the MGM into this hotel room, and it smelled like a bar. And this person we ended up taking them to detox. I don't know if they lived, I don't know if they died. But in 1 week of them being in Las Vegas, not only did they get up their sobriety, but very possibly they gave up their life. Because in the hotel room was a person who was trying to make up for all the time he didn't drink. And alcoholism is not only the only disease that'll tell you you don't have it, but it's the only disease you will pick up where you would have been if you didn't stop drinking. And if that doesn't scare you, nothing will scare you. You're not fully convinced that you're a real alcoholic. And I hope you are. I hope that when you're in this room tonight, you're convinced and you'll do everything you possibly can for yourself to be as well as possible. I'm not one of those people who believes that the newcomer is the most important person in the room. Bob Earl said, if you believe the newcomer is the most important person in the room, then you view AA as a giant furnace that needs new coals to keep it going. He said the fact is, we who are already here, if we don't do everything we can for ourselves, there's not going to be anyone here when the newcomer arrives. So we who have been around a minute, Mike and Dean and others, we have to do everything we can to portray recovery in a manner that the newcomer says, I want what you have. Because then they're only going to, if they want what the bartender has, they want what the pretty girl down, or the pretty guy says down at the end of the bar, but do they want what we have? Do they see joy and fun in our existence? Because for many of us growing up, and it really doesn't matter whether what your socioeconomic level is. It doesn't depend upon race. It doesn't matter if you're the only child. It doesn't matter if you're the middle child of 7 kids. It doesn't matter. Something about us told us that something was different. We didn't know what it was because we were very young. We're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, but we've always felt uncomfortable. So when we first started drinking, and most alcoholics begin drinking when they're 14 to 16 years old. That's been my experience. Because alcohol, it was a relief for me. It didn't take away the pain. It just masked it. It told me that no matter what is going on right now, everything right here is okay. I could do what I tell people. I would go through life sideways, because going through life head on was far too painful for a guy like me. I went to bed till I was 11 because I had such severe anxiety. And you know, when you grow up being called piss pot, it doesn't do a lot for your ego, or at least it didn't mine. And because you couldn't invite friends over, you couldn't have people over your house because they would smell your bedroom. It smelled like urine. And that's how I was until I was 11. And by the time I was 14 years old, I drank the first time because I could get away with it. But I tell you, the second time I drank, because I remembered how it made me feel the first time I drank. Father Martin likes to say, we drink essentially because it puts to sleep that which makes us feel uncomfortable. And it put to sleep me. It put to sleep everyone looking at me in a way that I didn't understand. And they may have been looking at me innocently, but to me it was convicting, because deep down inside I knew I was a nothing. I came from nothing, I was a nothing, and I always was going to be a nothing. But certain amounts of alcohol made me feel like an almost. And boy, when you're nothing and you can be an almost, you want more of that. So in the kind of alcoholic I am, by the time I was 18 years old, drinking periodically, the drink started to move me from the equation. Like I said, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, first the man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink. And with me, the drink started to take a drink when I was 18 years old. I would brag about this until I realized it was part of my addiction. I was so defiant that when I was 18 years old, I walked into the registrar's office in Corvallis, Oregon, because we'd moved from Southern California to Corvallis. Don't ever do that to your kids. And we went there, and January 3rd of 1972, I walked into the registrar's office. I said, I'm dropping out of high school. And they said, you can't do that. I said, I can do anything I want. I'm 18 years old. And that was my first journey into, I'll show you, I'll kill me. And by that time, alcohol, like I say, began to remove me from the equation. It wasn't so much as whether I was going to drink. It was how much I was going to drink, because I was still employable. I still, had a somewhat of a future. I thought I would go into the Air Force. I went into the Air Force just to be kicked out of the Air Force. I never made it out of basic training. They gave me an honorable discharge, and on the discharge it said inability to adjust to military life. They could have given me a discharge that said inability to adjust to life, and they would have been right. Here I was, 18 years old, and I was already lost, and the only thing that I could find as my salvation was alcohol. Does anyone remember that? Remember that how alcohol would capture you in a way that nothing else can capture you. They slowed everything down long enough so you didn't have to blow your brains out. Because alcoholism the active alcoholic is a way of slow suicide, because it will surely kill you. And it's evidenced by this room. This room should be full with everyone who has a problem with alcohol. But there's 40 people in this room tonight? People who have decided to be treated, because alcoholism is such a deadly killer. Like I say, it's the only disease known to man that will tell you you don't have it. It is a disease of denial. And so losing, I was accustomed to, the more I lost, the more I drank. The more I drank, the more I lost. And it just was a cycle that went on and on and on. By the time I was 26 years old, I had moved to Las Vegas, which made perfect sense at the time. You give an alcoholic 24-hour access to alcohol, and they just hit the jackpot. And I was talking to a person earlier. My first 12-step meeting was a meeting of Gamblers Anonymous, because Father Martin once again says the first rule of every good alcoholic is to protect the supply. So I figured if I could just stop gambling long enough, maybe I wouldn't go to casinos and get their free drinks, like nothing is free. But I would go and I would gamble my paycheck, my rent, my water bill, all those things that go along with getting paid. And I would get drunk, and I thought if I just couldn't go, if I just wouldn't go to the casinos, I wouldn't drink that much because I wouldn't gamble that much. But I found out that I was an isolated drinker. I found out I really don't need people as long as I have alcohol. You know, people were just an excuse for me to drink because you didn't know me. I could be anything to anyone at any given time. And I'm married, and I'm going into bars looking for women who would believe the lie one more time. And the places and the things that alcoholism gets you to go and do and get you to become, I'm not embarrassed by it anymore, but I used to be very embarrassed by the person I'd become. And by the way, Alcoholics Anonymous is the only place, once again, that the more we know about you, the more we ask you to come back. And that was a very difficult thing for me to learn. And so I want you to learn, if you learn anything by tonight's meeting, just keep coming back. Because that's the only way that you get to know us and we get to know you. And I was afraid, you know, we say keep coming back, it works when you work it. That sounded really good, but it sounded rather trite to me because in my mind I thought, but if you really knew about me, if you really knew where I went, what I did, where I came from, all the particulars about me, you would ask me to not come back. And I would be the first person in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous that you would ask not to come back, just based on my past. And it wasn't until I relapsed and I came back to the program of April 25th, 1986, and I realized that no matter what I thought, I had to do everything I possibly could to stay. Because I knew, it says on page 30, we had to concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. And it wasn't until I relapsed. Because you know, what had got me most of my relapse was in 5 days, my relapse lasted 5 days, April 19th to April 25th, how quickly I got back worse off than I was. I couldn't believe it. I was at the Rhett Butler Motel, and many of you are familiar with Las Vegas. It's 15th and Fremont, right on the corner, Rhett Butler Motel, classy place. They rent rooms by the hour. You could 3 hours by the day and by the week. That's the kind of place this was. And I was holed up in this room, catty corner from a bar, so it made perfect sense. And I ended up in this room, and I thought, how could I get back here so quickly? How could I be so devastated in life? And you know, I talk about voices being disappeared. They were no longer Bobby, 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 what are you doing? These voices were replaced with keep coming back. Easy does it. One day at a time. It works if you work it. Put God first. All the things that you had taught me in AA. And so I knew at this point I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to live. So it made perfect sense to go back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And in the years before that, though, before I ever got to AA, my life would incrementally get worse. By the time I was 26 years old, the drink took the man. And I was drinking inappropriately in everywhere I possibly could. By this time, I used to dabble in drugs, but by this time, drugs were just part of my story. You know, the more I drank, the more I used, the more I used, the more I drank. Because alcohol was always my DOC, my drug of choice. Was always. And I would hang out with some pretty bad people. But they were doing everything I needed done. And this spiraled out of control. My first wife left me, or I left her, I'm not sure. I just know I showed up one day, she said, you don't live here anymore. The funniest thing though, okay, this is my only funny story. Are you ready? So I don't know how long I was married to my second wife. but I remember the address. I always knew how to get home. I didn't, to this day, I don't know. Matter of fact, Kathy called, I think Laura was pregnant with our second child. I've been married over 36 years now. And Kathy called and asked if we ever got divorced. I was married to Laura for probably 4 or 5 years. And I said, I hope so, you know. And she said, did you ever file the papers? And I said, I hope so. And she said, well, I better go check because I don't think we're divorced. But anyway, so that's where alcohol took me. In the doctor's opinion, it says we're no longer able to differentiate the truth from the false. And I didn't know up from down. I didn't know right from wrong. I didn't know 2 or 3 years in my sobriety what was true and what wasn't true, because I had told lies all the time. Lies were just a part of who I was, and I remember telling a story or two in a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, or telling, and I think, did that really happen? It felt like it happened. I didn't know. I know now that I never, lost my car and ended up in a bridge in St. George. It sounds really exotic, but it never happened to me. But I would tell that story 3 or 4 years of my sobriety, and one day I thought, dang, I don't think that really occurred. But it sounded really good, so I don't tell that story anymore. But alcoholism took me to a place where I would never go today. And understand, it's not the alcohol. If it were alcohol, everyone who drank would be alcoholic. It's alcoholism. Because I know too many people who drink responsibly and they don't have a problem with alcohol. I got no problem with that. But I have a problem with me drinking, because alcohol is cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it is too much. And I learned that the hard way. And I hope, one of the things that Bill talked about, he talked about raising the bottom. And I hope you considered, if you're in this room tonight and you've raised your hand and you've said to yourself that you're alcoholic, there are these things in your life, they're called yets. Y-E-Ts, yet. They've yet to happen to you. I would suggest to you that if you go back out and drink, you can start crossing those yets off your list. Why not just settle for being here now, learning to live a life of sobriety, and moving forward after that? Because life, and I don't even have it as bad as some people do. When I would go into prisons and institutions, the greatest joy for me was always hearing the doors close behind me. And I got to go home to a warm bed instead of sleeping in a prison cell with men I do know or don't know or like or don't like. And there was a family, they're called the Jones family of 5. And you know what about this family is? I've never killed them. Have you known men and women who woke up in a jail cell and find out that they killed the family and they don't even remember that they drove? It's frightening. Can you imagine if you were that person? The jailer says, you say, why am I here? And you said, well, you were driving last night. I was? I don't even know where my car is. And by the way, you killed a family. That happens all the time to people like you and me. And if that hasn't happened to you yet, and you don't wake up with a cup full of gratitude, you're not looking at our addiction the way, because for whatever reason, God has spared you from that. He didn't spare me, and didn't spare a lot of us from a lot of things, but those types of things where you're doing prison for the rest of your life. He has spared you from those things. when I got to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I wanted to be so much like the other people because I wanted what they had. And I thought if I could just be. And I've learned so many things along the way. I've had so many incredible teachers. The only reason I'm sober is because I've worked at 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I live in the big book. My sponsor, Will, tells me that if we, step 10 says, continue to take personal inventory, and when we're wrong, promptly admit it. Will tells me, clear away the wreckage of my present so it doesn't become the wreckage of my past, which is great advice. So every day I work steps, just like I would anywhere else, looking to gain anything in life. Once again, our obligation is to the newcomer. Our obligation is to the person who we can hand this thing off to. When my sponsor Jack was my sponsor for 32 years before he passed away of cancer. And I asked Jack, I said, Jack, what do I tell him? Because I knew cancer had ravaged his body by this time. And I knew it would be the last time that I'd speak to him. He was in Las Vegas, and I drove down from Salt Lake City to visit him, and I saw him in the hospital, and I said, Jack, what do I say? And he said, Bob, tell him it works. And that was the last thing he ever said. So if you're new or relatively new to the program of Alcohol, it works. It works if you work it. It doesn't work as osmosis. It doesn't work when we're sitting on the couch eating bonbons, although that's not a bad thing. I love bonbons and I love my couch. But it doesn't work just because I want it to work. I can't will it to work. This is a program of action. And rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. And either you follow the path or you don't. And it's unfortunate that we see some people and we never see them again. Joe and Charlie, who I listen to on a regular basis, and if you've got the app, Everything AA, you can find Joe and Charlie tapes. Joe and Charlie talk about, we go into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we turn the room over to a bunch of sick people, and we're wondering why AA is not what it used to be. And there was a time in the forward to the second edition that talks about in people who come in, 50% of them got sober from day one. They never drank again. 25% got sober after a relapse. That means 75% of everyone, either sober or relapsed, lived without alcohol-free for the rest of their life. What's happened? The first 164 pages haven't changed. We've changed. Not so much for the good. When I got sober, it hurt being sober because it was very difficult not drinking. It felt like I was doing time. But sometimes we just have to get through things. We just have to work through things. And if you don't have a sponsor, get a sponsor. If you're not working the steps, work the steps. If you don't have a power greater than yourself, get a power greater than yourself. And the nice thing about that power greater than yourself, it can be anything you want it to be. It just can't be a doorknob or a coffee cup. I will repeat that. And I'll give you reason why. Because part of the component of recovery is the fellowship. I'm friends with Mike. And what a wonderful thing that is. I look forward to seeing him because Mike's always got a handshake and a smile. And he's always got something positive. Same with Dean. Same with Gary. Same with Chetley. And there's a freshness about them. So the fellowship is an important part. It says on page 17, though, that in itself would have not held us together as we are now joined. But the fellowship is very, very important. So we keep coming back for the fellowship, but little by little by little, the roots of recovery begin to take hold. But the roots of recovery take hold as we develop along the way, as we develop and we learn that outside of not drinking or using, this is not a program for not drinking or not using. This is a program for developing a relationship with a power greater than yourself. And as a result of that relationship, you will no longer drink or use. That's why there's 12 steps in the program. That's why step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, step 6, step 7, steps 11 and 12 deal directly with a power greater than yourself. And it can't be a doorknob or a coffee cup because you have one of those at home. You have a doorknob that does nothing unless you turn it, and a coffee cup that needs you to pick it up and drink from it. But us, you can't find anywhere but the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you think you can have a doorknob or a coffee cup, then you're going to think you can have a doorknob or a coffee cup. But nothing gives you the satisfaction of being in a room of people who are just like you. I was in a meeting earlier today and we were reading chapter 3, and dang, it tells me everything about me. Everything about me that I live in this illusion. I live in a delusion. And then it tells me all the ways that I tried to stop drinking, switching from scotch to brandy, swearing off forever, with or without the solemn oath, all the things that I think I did along the way, and some more things even still that did not work for me, but I was willing to try them. So everywhere we go in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the big book, it will tell our story. And little by little, the fellowship makes us feel so good. In the big book, it says that God will show us how to create the fellowship we crave. And we do crave fellowship because all I ever wanted when I was a child, I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be appreciated for what I thought I brought to the table, not the ridicule I felt as part of being me. And I think every one of us want that at the core of every person. That's why you're here tonight. You're hoping that you'll see a smile, you'll get a handshake, you'll get a hug, you'll get something that will make you feel good about you because you feel good about someone else, how they received you. And your sobriety is doing for you what alcohol could never do. Because I don't know about you, maybe I do. In Las Vegas, they have bars everywhere, down every street. And I used to go into those places, and I used to have 2 or 3 drinks before I could feel like I was a part of people's lives that I'd never met before. Never met them. And within 3 or 4 scotches, 5 scotches, I was planning vacations with them. And here in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, people I've never seen before. There was a time I didn't know who Dean was. Now Dean's a great friend. He's always ready with a smile. He's always ready with a hug. He's always ready with a handshake. Where are you going to find that sober? But the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is the greatest gift I've ever received. From that gift, I have gone on my 11th grandchild. Yeah, I know. I have great hair, and I'm 72. Thank you, Dean. I did that for that. 11 grandchildren. I've been married over 36 years. Laura's my 3rd wife, and I've been married over 36 years. I have 5 children. 4 of them have forgiven me to the degree that I want. One is off doing drugs in her own world. But you know, my wife has never seen me drunk. That's why she's my wife to this day. And I could go anywhere and I can do anything. I can be anything I want to be because I am recovered alcoholic. I've recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I don't believe there's a cure for alcoholism. It says, science may one day accomplish this, but it hasn't done so yet. And I never want there to be a cure for alcoholism because I never want to stop doing the things that I do to live, not just alcohol and drug free, but you know what? I woke up this morning and I thought, how can I be a better husband? How can I be a better friend? What could I do to be better today than I was yesterday? Where are you going to find that? Except in some highly religious environment, which is just filled with a bunch of hypocrites. You know what a hypocrite is, right? A hypocrite is a person who's not themselves on Sunday. And we come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's okay being flawed. It's okay being who we are. It's okay claiming spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. It's okay being human. It's okay knowing that we need others to be successful in life. And that's true of the 12. The only reason I get well is to help another person. A lot of times people treat AA as therapy. It's not therapy. AA, I challenge anyone in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to tell me one step or one paragraph that tells me I need to feel good about me before I feel good about you. If I feel good about you and you see value in me, I will feel better about me. The only reason I get well is to help the next person and to tell other people that I'm sorry. That's the only reason we have surrender. It's the only reason we do step 4. We ask God to remove defects of character and shortcomings, not so we can be better people for ourselves, but we can be better for others. I'm still waiting for the step that says, now about you, Robert. But it stops at step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. There's nothing in there about me. And I challenge, if you know of anywhere in the big book that tells me I can focus on me, let me know after the meetings because I want to focus on me. Right? But me is a problem. There's been too much of me that got me to the rooms of alcohol. It was always me. If it was about others, I would have listened. I would have said, maybe you're right, maybe alcohol, because they were telling me for a long time, maybe you should not drink as much as you're drinking. Maybe you should cut back just a little bit. You seem a little bit high. Because remember, we would go to family events and we would get liquored up before we went. We'd leave early to drink the rest of what we were intending to drink. And we would never let people know how much we drank, because then they would be convinced. They already knew just by my behavior and the things that I did along the way that alcohol was a problem. They didn't know how big of a problem alcohol was. I had a brother who told me, if we could have done anything for you, we would have, but you told us we'd be better off if we left. My dad, when he dropped me off at the Red Butler Motel on April 19th of 1986, he looked at me and he said, your mother and I aren't going to watch you die. That's my dad. He was the last bastion of hope I had, because he was sober by this time. The nice part about that story, and I don't tell it often enough, 9 months later, he'd be over at my house having Christmas dinner, and he'd come up and give me a watch. I still have this watch to this day. And he said, your mother and I used to worry about you, but we don't worry anymore. And I owe my life to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope you, if you're here, you have a reason to be here. I hope that if you're new, you keep coming back, because, and I'm looking right at you, because we will love you in a way that you've always wanted to be loved. We will care for you in a way that you may not think is necessary, because you might need money, you might need a house. I don't know what you need, but we'll give you things that you couldn't get no matter how drunk you got. And we'll always be here for you. I'm going to read page 17 and I'm going to close. It's probably my most favorite page of the big book, if there was such a thing. But there's a solution. Here we go. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know of thousands of men and women who are just once as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented as many political, economic, and social and economic backgrounds and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix. But there exists amongst us a fellowship and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner when, moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steers to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our own individual way. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which now binds us, but that in itself would have not held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. My name is Robert. I'm a